Hey there, I am going to give you a little demo around an app that I'm working on, tentatively named Travel Digest. Probably won't be the name, but it works for now. So, the motivation towards sort of working on this app was two things. One, I've been building products in the travel space for the last couple of years and really enjoy it. I've been doing this with other people and other companies, and I thought it'd be cool just to work on something myself for a little bit. And the other is I really wanted to try out Remix. So, Remix, if you're not aware, is well, hang on, let me go to their website. Remix. It is a framework that sits on top of React and does a bunch of things that you can check out on the website and check out their videos because they're really good. And I'm going to be kind of talking through this whole project as someone who's a Vue developer, not a React developer. I basically have never really worked with React. I think I have with Gatsby a few years ago. I built a few sites. It was okay, but I personally am very much aboard the Vue train more so than the React. So when Remix came across my radar, I thought, okay, why don't I give it a chance? Let's kind of like understand what it is offering. And my initial impressions are that it doesn't feel like the React that I didn't like when I was working with it. So previously I was working with Vue and React, and I was like, yeah, React feels so cumbersome compared to Vue. Vue was very elegant. And I've been using Vue ever since for the last few years. But when I come back and have a look at how Remix has solved some of the problems, what's sort of occurring to me is that it wasn't necessarily React itself that was a problem, but it was all of the re-implementation of things that the browser does for free and what you do on server side for free that you had to do in the React way for it to make sense. But what I found with Remix so far, anyway, is that as a Vue developer, I haven't really had to learn any more React. I kind of just did things the way I thought they would make sense, and they kind of worked. So I'm going to show you through this app and what I've been working on, and if people want, I can do more videos on different sections of the app as I build it. But ultimately, I really just wanted to share this video as someone who's coming from Vue to React, or to React, but really to Remix specifically, and sort of my experience as I go through this process. And I'm going to show you the app and how I'm building it and everything else. So let's jump in. The app is called Trip Digest. It is a, as you say, personalized trip planning emails. So the idea is quite simple. You enter a field, you enter a form. Let's go have a look at this. It's going to be like this, which is I am doing a return trip that's international from Sydney, where I used to live, to Singapore, where I used to live, and you're going to go create trip. And basically from that input, that's the trip part, you're going to go and create digests. And a digest is just an email on a subscription. So the whole idea of the application is you provide all your input in terms of where you want to go, and the digest will be an email that gets sent to you whenever you want to receive it. So once a day, once a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever it may be, for all of the components of your trip that you care about. So if you think of a trip, people go from their home to the airport. They have their time at the airport. They have their flight from the airport. They have their journey to their accommodation. They have their accommodation. Then they have activities that they do during that trip. And then we do the whole thing in reverse. So my general idea is, what about if we could capture the trip and produce a personalized email that had recommendations for those components you haven't sorted out? So maybe you haven't sorted any of it out and you just want to go, I want to do this trip, create it. Or maybe you want to actually go through and say, I've got my flights, they're sorted, but I need a hotel, I need things to do, and I may want lounge access on the way back, because maybe you only have lounge access going over, but not coming back. So the whole idea is going to be just bringing together all the aspects of this trip, as the user, they get to decide all the things they want to do, or all the parts of the email that they are interested in. And as they check off the itinerary of what that trip's going to entail, then they will actually not have that in the email. So the email will progressively get smaller and smaller. The whole idea is that the email should be relevant every single time you receive it. If it's not, because you've booked that part of the trip, that gets removed. And what you have is ultimately a personalized email all the way until your trip is done. And that trip is done. No more emails from us. But next trip you want to build, do you want to go on? You can come back and build another email. So that's the general idea. That's kind of what I'm working with. So let me have a quick kind of talk through of what I've got so far. We've got a home page. We're using Unsplash. We also will have, if I go to, I won't go to the other staging URL, but we have a little attribution credit down here as well. So trips is just going to be all your trips. But if I go into here and actually delete all the trips, you can see here I'm using Hasura Cloud. I've been using Hasura for years now, and I love them. It's an amazing database. I might do another video specifically on Hasura, but with Hasura, I've actually set this one up using Hasura Cloud. So I've just gone to their cloud platform and created a new instance and created a free Postgres database with Heroku. And my whole idea was not to worry about this for now. Typically, I will have a Docker set up locally where I'll be running Hasura locally, and everything will be super snappy and fast, and I'll create a whole bunch of migrations and things like that. But I thought, you know what? I really just want to focus on Remix. So instead of worrying about the technology I already feel very comfortable with, I set up Hasura Cloud. So let's jump back to the application. I'm going to go home. I'm going to do a refresh and I'll go trips. So what we have here is it's going to go automatically to new because I don't have one. Now we don't really have a concept of a session at this point. I'm just ignoring user state. I'll come back to that at some point. Everything's public. Everyone can see everyone's trips. We're not collecting emails at this point, so it doesn't matter anyway. Let's have a look at the code. So our entry, that big homepage, was the data that came from Unsplash. So I'm using an API key here, and this is part of Remix where you have a loader function, and this here executes on the server, which is pretty cool. So on the server, before I load the page, if I jump back to, not there, back to home. So if I do a hard refresh on the page, this actually gets run and then executed and returns back. Now, because I was hitting the Unsplash API limit, what I did was, here we go. If we're in development, just return a blank object. If we return a blank object, I'm basically pulling an image from disk. They allow you 100 image requests an hour, and obviously with fast reloading, it was just like bam, 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 bam. So I didn't want that. I wanted to have a fresh image, which will be on production, but in development, just give me whatever. But basically, call their API, get the travel image or the travel topic, and random image, return it. So then here we're down into the default component, which is kind of the React that gets exported. This is actually done on the client. So the cool thing here is that this is done on the server. This is executed on the server. And when you render the page, which is this home component, this useLoader data will actually be the thing that's responsible for kind of transforming this into a fetch request and then returning back the data, which is cool because if you go from client-side routing, it'll just do a general browser fetch request. But if you're doing a full server, if you're doing a full reload from the server, a full server-side refresh, it actually will execute this function server-side and then embed this directly into the page. So it's just there. Very cool. So what do we have? Recently, I just added this. Once again, not used React, so I was like, I'm going to guess how to add a loader bar to this page. And it was really like getting this component and looking at the documentation. The only thing I was unfamiliar with is this use effect. I had to add the state here and add a ref here. So this loading ref is kind of familiar because now the Vue 3 composition API is very much like this. It's nice that you can type it with a generic. And then use effect is very similar to watch, I think it is, watch effect in Vue. With watch effect, you So with watch, you actually explicitly pass in the dependencies like this as the first parameter, and watch effect, it will automatically collect its dependencies, so you don't need to actually explicitly provide them. But it was pretty easy for me to just type state, so I didn't really mind that. And we're just diffing on basically, is it loading or is it idle? And then that's just moving the loader bar. So that was really easy. That was the first actual React thing I've had to do in this project so far. As in something that was very specifically React. But anyway, using JSX has been pretty straightforward. I've had to kind of figure out a few little things like class name instead of class. It kind of gets me a little bit. This whole checking for something and returning JSX, otherwise null. I remember that from when I first did it. It's okay. It feels very similar to some things we're doing in Vue. I think loops and stuff are obviously a bit different, but I found it really easy to just get going with this. So this is the home page. We've got a loader bar. So what happens here, I'm going to click trips. Now what's interesting from here, I actually go over to this trips route. And in this trips route, we have an outlet, which is the slot in Vue, where we're actually rendering out the page. But we've got that loading bar again implemented here at the top. And we also have the nav in here. So these here are actually layouts. So we have the index layout, which is both the layout and the home page in one. But then the trips layout is this one. That's going to be /trips because we use file routing, file system routing, page routing, whatever we call it. File system routing, I think it's called, in Remix. And so we're defining the nav here, and then we're just got an outlet where we're just spitting it out. As you would know here, I'm using Tailwind, which I have recently, within the last 6 months, started to use and been completely converted. I've loved it. All right, so we've got an outlet here, and then we've got this. Now this is cool. When I click this button, what's going to happen is it will immediately go to that trips route, but then this loading bar kicks in while I'm loading the data for the index. Now, if I look here, the index actually has a loader, which is go and get all the trips, but if there are no trips, just redirect to new. It's kind of cool. Let's have a look. So we go loading bar. We're now on trips. It's actually going and doing some data fetching. That's real data fetching from Hasura, which is actually hosted in the cloud. So if I was doing this locally, this would be snappy, but it's nice to be able to use a cloud database because it's quick, as well as it kind of makes all the loading states actually real. I don't have to slow it down myself. So because we have no trips, if I go to my trips, it's going to keep pushing me back to new because I don't have a trip. That's this loader function that is constantly being listing, checking for trips, and going, no, you don't have any, go back to new. So that's kind of nice. I like that logic. Let's have a look here. So in this is our create new trip component. This is really just a matter of pulling out the airports. These are the airports for the loader function, which we need to bring back in. We have one way and return. But the cool thing, and this is kind of probably the ending point of this video, is that when we press create trip, you can see here, this is actually a form component. So with Remix, you just have a form and you're just going to post, and it's going to post to this same URL. So it's going to do a post to this localhost trips new, or localhost 3000 trips new. And it's going to send in each of these fields that are part of that, and it will actually use the name attribute to send that in as an object. So you can see here that we've got, you can also add your button as well, but we've got one way of return, domestic or international, origin, and destination. That's basically it. And for both the origin and destination, we're taking the airports that we got from the data loader, and we're mapping over that and creating a whole bunch of options with the city name and the IATA. That's it, which generates this page. If I refresh the page as a hard reload, it's going to have all the data there as well. So when I do this, what's going to happen is I'm going to go create trip. And this, I should show some loading state at that point, but that was actually posting a form here. So it was actually getting handled by this action function, which is handled on the server. So this is one of the things that really got me into Remix, is the idea that you've got server-side data fetching, you've got the component that renders on the client. Well, it renders on the server if it's a full refresh, or it renders on the client providing it's a refresh between pages, or redirection, client-side redirection within pages. And then you've got this action, which is your post, put, delete, whatever request. And that is really cool because so much of the time in Vue, I had to have this separation of concerns of his front end code and his back end code. And even with Netlify, you can have like your own servers, like server API folder. I think with Nuxt, you can have a server folder as well and just builds an API. That's cool, but I am kind of blown away with how nice it is to have this in the one file. Here's where I get the data. It's safe. I can make a DB call right here. It's okay. I can write SQL here. It's completely fine. It's not going to get shipped to the client. And I can do the same here for the action. I'll show you what these list airports and save trip and everything else looks like in a sec. But this kind of having all the mutations here and the queries here and then just rendering this, I really like this. It's super cool. So we're actually now on a trips/ID page. So you can see here, if I look at my folder structure, I've got index and trips, which we already looked at. And we've got the index page, the new, and trip ID. And trip ID, this $ trip ID is what gets rendered here. So when we're on a page where we've got a random ID, that's going to show here. Now, if I want to do some validation, like this has to be a UUID, otherwise throw an error, I could do that right in here. So this is the show trips route. I should say, because I've got an extra folder and I've got a deeper nested thing, I have, this is another outlet. And then that means if this is an outlet, you have to come into the index of the folder which is referring to. I might get into more of that later, but it's fine. So I could just easily add in here a loader function and say, hey, if the param trip ID is not a UUID or valid UUID, boom, get out of here. You could also say if this UUID doesn't match the owner whose cookie is being sent, for example, kick them out of here. So there's a bunch of logic you can do in that redirect phase. Awesome. Now if I go back to my trips, then we're going to have that one trip to Sydney. Abu Dhabi to Abu Dhabi. That's because I saved it. But I could do that Sydney to Singapore one that I was working on before. And then if I go back into here, I'm back to the trip. So it's really nice. So this is just the prototype I'm working on at the moment. Last thing I wanted to show in the video was these things. So you can see that I have set up a database here that's just available for me to write against. I'm doing a mutation where I'm inserting a trip, and you can see here that I've actually used, I'm using GraphQL CodeGen, which, let me just show you this here. So actually it's called GenQL. So GenQL, and not GraphQL CodeGen, that is QL CodeGen, I forget what it's called. GraphQL Code Generator is one I've used before. It's pretty cool, but you have to write query documents and then it produces the SDK. GenQL is you can actually just run it against your server. So I can run it against my Hasura server and it will generate the SDK for me, which is really nice. So what I've actually can do is I can import from my DB client. This is generated. This is a generated SDK with all of my different all my different types and operations against my GraphQL API. I've got a type airport and type trip, and that actually takes the airports table and the trips table. I do this here just to make sure that it's quite clear when it's like a trip or like an array of trips. Otherwise, if I use trips and an array of trips, it's a little bit hard to understand what's going on. So I just kind of alias these types when I've imported here. But with GenQL, I just say create client against this URL. And then save trip is just going to be a client mutation, insert trip, and the object passed in is the trip. So this here, save trip, is taking the same shape object that is expected from the mutation of insert trip from my Hasura server via GenQL. That's really cool. And then here I've just got everything, because I could actually go, I only want domestic or international true as the return property of the object. But you can just also say everything, give me everything back. And the cool thing here is that this is everything that I'm permitted to see. So obviously if I'm querying something that I'm not allowed to see, it will throw an error. So save trip, list trips, and then list airports is basically query, get airports, order by ascending, where the ID is in a bunch of airport IDs. So I've actually trimmed down all the airports in the world to a bunch of airports that I really just want to show. And this here is all running on the server. So the fact that I've actually got db.server.tsx means it will never, ever, ever be exposed to the client, which is good because we might do some sensitive stuff in here. And then from the actual loader function, I'm just calling list airports. So I believe Remix does some really cool things where if you have a dependency that you've imported that's only used in the loader function or the action, it basically does not expose that and any of its dependencies to the client, because this here, the default export, is what gets exposed to the client. These ones will always remain server-side. So if I add like a secret in here that I probably shouldn't, but if I add a secret in here, or at least something sensitive, as long as I'm only calling it here in the loader, it'll be fine. It'll either be rendered server-side on first render, or if I'm navigating client-side, it will just call it as a fetch request, and this will just be like an API route. Really cool. Really, really cool. So that's kind of the end of this little walkthrough. That's the app I'm working on. I have usually worked on apps mostly not in public. I've kind of just built stuff myself. But I thought with this one, I'm just going to build it and share some stuff as I'm going so people can follow along should they want. Feel free to leave any suggestions, any tips. I'm a React newbie, so there's probably plenty of things I'm doing wrong. I'm bringing very much a reasonably advanced Vue developer's perspective to this. And there might be some things that I find fascinating that everyone finds boring, or there might be some things I'm doing completely wrong, and that's okay. But please let me know and follow along if you like. But I'm just going to pop these out whenever I feel like it's an appropriate time to switch on the camera. See you later.